Hey, don't guys, got that funk? Asked me to pinch hit again, and happy to do so. I again want to reiterate, I think it's really an uphill climb, 2017, to bring opposition views, to have a home for them, to have intellectual honesty. It's a tomb for our civilization, because to talk about things is to self-correct. And it's not just that even. It's that when a people aren't communicating with one another, the powerful, the elite, the establishment, the corrupt, they grow in their power. It's just disheartening, particularly since I think we're 100% being played against each other. Those differences are real. The partisan differences are real, and I'm not actually one who's like, let's kumbaya it, let's nonpartisan our way into utopic, civilization. I think that's all nonsense. I don't think that's even possible. And that gives me an opportunity to kick open the door of the topic that I have today. So I think what we're facing in the United States of America is a non-bloody civil war. I really believe the country is irreconcilably divided. I don't think we share fundamentals. I don't. When we speak of American values, when I hear the left speak of American values, they have no correlation with what I read in the founding, and they certainly have no correlation with what I think they are. But I've been completely convinced that that is, however, what the Democrat Party and the left today see as what they want to birth into being. Sort of like a great awakening, the way they speak of it. I don't see sort of a constitutional convention appetite from the left. I see a European / soft socialism / we want to invent the rest appetite for the future, which, well, I think that's being intellectually honest. As you engage in discourse with today's American left, they really separate themselves by way of ideas and what they say in almost no substantial way from socialist democrats of Europe. And I've been all through Europe several times. I've had fascinating and interesting conversations with Europeans. They essentially sound exactly like American Democrats today. So I lay that before you because I think that's a fair statement. I mean, I happen to think in real terms that the cat's out of the bag, the Pandora's box has been opened by way of unconstitutional behavior, ridiculous amounts of power in the executive branch, a neutered Congress, a runaway, ridiculous tyrannical judiciary. That's what I happen to think. I think returning to like a strict constitutional governance, although I 100% think that's the remedy for a lot of our civic and body politic problems. I think there's almost no realistic way of doing that. Both sides have just become comfortable with expansive government, expansive power over our lives. In many ways, I think we want that. It's very disheartening to me, but I'm a realist. I think that's where we're at. However, there's an enormous amount of the country that will not have their liberty trampled, will not ever feel cool or comfortable with totalitarian government, even a soft totalitarian government, or a continuous expanding government. That's just one area of divide. You have the social engineering realm. What's happening in this nation is there are social engineering elitists that truly do believe that they're Nostradamus-like in their vision of the future or vision of what humanity should be. I think they have every intention of social engineering and puppeteering style our behavior, our attitudes towards gender, our attitudes towards religion. I think it's safe to say they're willing to do anything to bring those things about and have very, very little, if no, respect for the individual, for individual wishes, for religious liberty. I think those things are just impediments. I think they'd be willing to do almost anything, including thin the herd, if you know what I mean. I see that all on the horizon. I think the social engineering left is profoundly dangerous in their hubris, in their chutzpah, in their elitism, in their disregard for the pages and the trappings of history and the shoulders on which we're standing by way of generation after generation after generation who lived and learned and projected wisdom to us, not arbitrarily, but because they lived an entire life and they said, this is what we discovered, this is the best way to do things. I don't think our feet should be planted firm concrete, but I'm not flippant about that either, and I don't just write them off as slave owners or misogynistic or whatever else the Johnny-come-lately term is. I think that's profound in its ignorance, irresponsible. I think it's juvenile. I think it's highly emotive. I think the egomaniacal tyranny of the now, where everything we think, or more importantly, feel, is obviously, what we should do, obviously wise, obviously worth hastily rushing into. I think that's all preposterous. I think those things are drastically and irreversibly dividing the body politic, the nation in America. I think we are being divided purposefully by way of race. Sadly, I might end up looking back on sort of my elementary, middle school, and then high school years as like a wonderful reprieve away of race relations. I mean, granted, I grew up in the North, and when I became an adult, I traveled to the South, and I did experience very, very real, palpable, tangible racism. But it was to say that actual racism, and what I mean by that, let me be very clear, because that word's just bandied about now. What I mean by that is a human being who hates or wishes ill, anger, ill intent, bigotry on another person simply because of the color of their skin. Let's not forget that's actually the definition of racism. I know that that word has been through the laundromat a million different ways. When I was a kid, it was profound as I reflect on it, because there was so little of that actual racism. Was there prejudices? Sure. Was there miscommunication, a lack of understanding culturally between people of all races? Yes. Was there insensitivities? Absolutely there were. But it is my firm belief that by way of the way human beings actually are, and the stuff that's just essentially baked into the cake of who we are as people, there arguably was never a better time. Of course, it was not blissful race relations. I mean, we had the LA riots. I mean, there was all kinds of historical problems by way of race. But I can honestly say that from, my childhood to, maybe arguably when I was around 18 and left my parents' home, it was as rare to see somebody openly act in a racist way towards another human being in my part of the country, in my upbringing. I'm proud, actually, to see how little of that actually happened. And I think most of you, if you're really honest with yourself, would have to say the same, allowing room for problems and so on and so forth. What I truly believed happened was the powerful became more and more exposed. Their corruption became more and more exposed. The corruption that impacted all of us, from corporate corruption to government corruption, which is 6 1/2 in the other, media corruption to incest by way of power, just that runs the gamut. They realized that they were being more and more exposed, and I really truly believe that there was purposeful strategies as to how to re-inject, fan the spark. I would argue it had diminished to a spark, race relations in our nation, to divide people, to distract. All those terms are back, all this suspicion is back. You just see the powerful just irresponsibly just drop ridiculous bombs of division on the people. I'm telling you, that's done for power. Does that mean that there's absolutely no problems? Does that mean that we shouldn't talk about that? Absolutely, we should talk about that. In fact, open dialogue about race is something I really welcome. But it's never the intention here. We're to be divided so that we're looking at each other, so that we're petty, so that the peasants are fighting over breadcrumbs. And I totally believe that race was a wedge they purposely reignited in our society. Now, if that's true, I just want you to imagine this. Imagine the evil. Imagine the profound evil of people that would do that for their own means, for their own benefit, to fortify their own power. The lives that would be lost, the generations that would live in fear, the quantum leap of progress that we've made as a civilization in that regard. To tear that down for power purposes is so evil as to bring bile to the back of my throat. And I'm telling you, I believe that. Same thing with class. It was purposefully done with class. It was purposefully done with gender. All these things have legitimate problems. The body politic is dealing with legitimate problems under the tent of race, under the tent of class, under the tent of gender. I'm not dismissing them. I'm saying these things are purposefully instigated among us, purposefully fanned among us to stifle real conversation, which is virtually impossible to have now. It's almost impossible to have. Again, another reason I'm lauding The Breakfast Club, because at least you're making an attempt at it. With that being said, when we look towards solutions into the future, one of the priorities for me is how do we keep people from getting killed? How do we alleviate violence, which I think is just knocking on the door? Infrastructure completely falling apart. Law completely falling apart. I mean, we romanticize these things now. We're awash in this post-apocalyptic, entertainment stuff, and I'm as much a fan of that as anybody else. But sometimes I wonder if people have really done business with that by way of thinking about that, how horrific that would be, how children and families and neighborhoods and the downtrodden and the weak, how disproportionately they would be affected. Remind yourself that the gated community, they'll lock those gates. These people that are just hurling Molotov cocktails at the vision in our midst, and the glass breaks and the fire explodes, we all react to the fire while they sit back. What I consider to be like puppeteering. Let's say their irresponsibility comes to blows. Their instigation between the populace and the police force, their instigation between races, their instigative attitude towards classes, their instigative attitude towards the power and the peasant, all that stuff. Let's say these irresponsible, power-lusting, corrupt, evil let's say this power-lusting, evil, corrupt gaggle pushes it too far, and it does pop off. Who do you think bears the brunt of that? By way of blood? By way of sacrifice? Think about that. So with that in mind, I began to think about, well, what's a real solution? Because I think we're just too divided. We don't want the same nation. We don't want the same things. We don't long for the same things. To say that we do is just mindfully, intellectually dishonest, in my opinion. So what do you think about carving up the nation in a geographic fashion by way of values, by way of what we think are the solutions to the problems? I'll give you an example. I'm a fiscal conservative. I think less government empowers the people. I think less allegation of resources from an elite few and more innovation, more individual decision-making. Although that's messy in and of itself, I prefer that to the other. I think that's where more prosperity is had for all. I think that's where poverty problems are best dealt with. I don't think that brings about equality of outcome. I do, however, think that brings about the most equality of opportunity, which I'm interested in. And I don't think my leftist brethren are interested in this. I don't think that they care about opportunity. I think they care about outcome. And I think that they care about emotive fairness. And that's a myth. That's just a myth that's dangled like a carrot in front of us. We will never have equality of outcome for a host of what I deem to be very obvious reasons. I mean, when you walk down the city of New York City and you see the drastic differences, tangible, fact-based, unmovable differences among humanity, of course, the outcomes would not result the same. Everything from the way we're raised, to the cultures we come from, to the mindsets that we have, to the work ethic we have, to the natural talents we have. It's just ridiculous that we have allowed ourselves to be manipulated into thinking that that's what we should be striving towards. But nonetheless, I don't think I'm going to change the mind of my fellow countrymen and my leftist countrymen. I think they're chasing that aberration. There's nothing I can do about that, particularly since we can't talk to each other. So what if you could just move? So this is where it breaks down right now. The coasts are obviously, the northeast coasts are obviously very, very left-wing. Flyover state, not so much so. South, very conservative. You got this hodgepodge, you got pockets everywhere. But let's just say, for the sake of this thought experiment, that where those ideas are being implemented right now, we just say, if you want to live in a big state solution, if you want a ton of social engineering, demanding lifestyle, demanding life choices, demanding diet, demanding all this kind of stuff, you want to go pedal to the metal, green gone wild. You want to think chicken little sky is falling when the cows are flatulating. Fine, implement all that stuff. For the conservatives, the same thing goes. Religious liberty, fiscal sanity, at least what I would consider to be fiscal sanity, social conservatism, things that I actually want. Now, I realize that if the leftist was sitting here, he'd framework that very differently, but I'm not a conservative. Carve that out, and where you want to live, you move. You vote with your feet, and those things play out. This thought is riddled with problems. The underbelly of this is riddled with problems. The initial things that come to mind is, how do we defend ourselves as a nation if we're that divided? How are we all like paying into like the defense pool? That's problem number one. What about when the chickens come home to roost, which they would? So not all ideas are equal in implementation. I would argue the track record, the genocidal, body bag filling, murderous track record of big state solutions the verdict should be in on that if you read the slightest bit of history, but it isn't. I mean, as I speak to you, Venezuela is literally starving under Bernie Sanders' economic ideas, and it matters nothing to the millennials. It matters nothing to the left. But forget about that. We've debated that to the till. When those things bear out, there's going to be migrations. There's going to be people regretting their decisions. There's going to be people that want to mass migrate into other areas. That could create violence, right? I get that. Continuing to march towards what I see as a cliff in front of us by way of we're not of one mind. We don't want the same thing. We don't want the same legislations. We don't want the same allocations of resources. We don't want to live under the same social engineering. All that stuff's going to come to a blow. So marching, just continue to march as if that's not in front of us is foolish. I think we should mix it up and try some new things. What does it look like for a nation to be divided by way of ideology, giving the individual citizen the freedom to live where they want to live? I think it's a fascinating thing to think about. Thank you for listening, guys. I appreciate the opportunity to come to you again. Again, I want to encourage you to be true to your mission statement here of exchanging honest, real, candid, and truthful ideas, although we greatly differ.